One of the things that most people don't realize about this business is that the data and the numbers can literally tell you where the gold is at. They can tell you where the problem is. They can tell you what to focus on, what not to focus on, what's working and what's not working. The problem is that most people don't even realize they need to do that. And then they don't know how to read the data, and they don't know how to let the data tell them what to do and what's working and what's not working. In fact, when most people come up with topics or come up with their teachings or what they're going to teach on webinars, launches, and funnels, they just kind of make it up as they go, or they survey their audience and they don't really know, is this something people want? Is this going to convert? And am I teaching this in the most effective way? However, when we learn to read the data, especially around our content, all of those answers become clearer and clearer and clearer. And this episode today is dedicated to helping you understand what those numbers are, how to read them, so that you can fine tune the right titles, the right topics, and the right teachings inside of your marketing to increase sales, engagement, and conversions. So if that's interesting to you, well, keep on listening.
Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we are continuing our series. I believe this is episode number 4 of our series. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, number 4 of 6 episodes that we're going to be covering on how to build your business, how to generate more sales, how to improve your messaging, and more. And today we are diving into a topic that I think is a little underrated, something people don't realize the importance of, but it's numbers and data and how to understand if your content is working, how to look at if your ads are working, your business is working. Now, this topic is really, really important because I don't think enough people realize how data-driven the course industry is, but everything comes down to numbers. It's like we're constantly asking for conversions and actions and opt-ins and registrations and this and that, and all of those are numbers. So it's a very data-driven business, meaning every piece of content has a certain amount of likes, a certain amount of comments, a certain amount of views, a certain amount of reach. Then there's a certain amount of people that opt in from an ad, or there's a cost per lead, or there's like EPL, there's earnings per lead, there's conversion rates, there's show up rates. Like all of these are numbers that can tell you whether or not things are working. And I don't think enough people really understand the importance of the data, or how to read the data, or how to make changes based on what the data is showing us. And so today's episode is going to be dedicated to going through those numbers. Now, I do know that we have a previous episode on the podcast where we dive into the numbers inside of a business. You guys can go back, listen to that episode if you want more in depth on numbers throughout your entire business. And I'll sort of touch on those again at the end of today as well. But today, what I wanted to talk about is more of the significance of numbers around content and ads in particular. And then again, like I said, we will cover some business related ads as well. Now, the reason why it's really important to be able to look at your content and the numbers on your content is because we look at content as a testing ground for what's going to work in our funnels and our sales process and our launches. And I don't think a lot of people do that. So what most people do is they usually create topics for their launches and even the teachings for their launches or their webinars or their funnels or their evergreen, whatever. They look at those and just kind of come up with like, I think this is what I should teach. Oh, this is a benefit. This is a transformation. Let's use this title. And they just kind of create things as they go. And that can or cannot work, but I like to put more things in my favor than not. And so what I do is I start looking at like, well, what is working with our content? What titles are working? What topics are working? And not only that, I start looking at like, what was the most effective way to teach this topic? What stories worked really well? What metaphors, analogies, counterexamples all worked really well with this teaching? How do I teach this the best way? How do I create demand with it? What's getting people to resonate with it? And that allows me to fine tune and figure out, well, what's going to work inside of a launch, what topics, headlines are going to work, what teachings are going to work, all of that stuff. And so we start looking at all of this and we start coming up with ideas and ways to create trainings and opt-ins and ads and whatever it may be. We start looking at different ways to create all of this stuff. And that way our launches become more effective. Our funnels become more effective because we know what works already. And if you don't know how to read and understand the data behind the content, then it comes a little bit impossible to figure out, well, did this work? Did it not work? Is this landing and resonating? Is it not? And then you don't really know what's going to work inside your launches. So again, content for me is like a testing ground. It's a breeding ground of information and data to just see what's going to resonate and not resonate, what's going to work and not work, so we can put it into our launches. And so the first thing that we start to do is when we look at content, the very obvious ones are going to be the views and the likes. Those are going to be the very first two things you want to look at. Or if you have a podcast episode, it's the amount of downloads. Okay. So it's the amount of downloads or views or likes that you get. Now, this isn't always the most accurate form of data to look at because, you could have had a very curiosity driven title and it's like people just clicked because they wanted to just see, because they were curious. It doesn't mean there's something that they were necessarily going to be, have a vested interest in or watch for an hour if you do a webinar on the topic and stuff like that. So you do want to pay attention to those things, the views and the likes and the downloads, especially if it's a podcast. But you want to look at all the other data combined with those things. Okay. So the very first thing I look at is like, to determine, is this a good piece of content or a good topic? I look at views and I look at likes and I look at downloads first. And this is for all forms of content. This could be, images. This could be text things like text paragraphs, blog posts, whatever. This could be videos, reels, whatever it may be, podcast episode, whatever it may be, right? Views and likes is the first one. Then what I look at, and I might even, then the next thing I look at is going to be, if it's a video, I look at watch time. So how long did they watch it for? And this is usually a pretty good indicator of, is this a topic that's doing really well? But not only is this a topic that's doing really well, but am I teaching it in a way that really like pulls people in, that keeps them there? And so the watch time is a very good thing to start to look at because it gives you a little bit more of a clue in whether or not people are truly paying attention to the topic, but also how you teach it. So likes are good, views are good, downloads are good, but watch time is really where it starts to give you that, like, okay, is this something they can sink their teeth into? Am I teaching it in the right way? And you start to pay attention to those things. Okay. And there might be some videos, by the way, that don't get a lot of views and downloads and likes, but actually have huge amounts of watch time. And sometimes what that will tell you is like, okay, I taught this really well, but maybe I need a more juicy or effective headline or title around it because the teaching is really on fire. I just need more people to see it. So the data, depending on what it is, can tell you so many different things with the content. The next thing that I really like looking for to see if I've really nailed something is actually the shares and the saves. So I always look at what's going to take the most amount of energy for them to do. And that usually holds a little bit more weight. So it's going to take more time to share something. It's going to take more effort to share something. It's going to take more effort to save something. If people are saving something, that's kind of like, the king almost of like, this was so valuable and so informative or so awareness raising or so mind blowing that I'm literally going to save it for later. That's like the ultimate, like, okay, there's some weight here. There's some depth in how I taught it, but also the topic. Okay. And shares, it's kind of the same thing. So now I'm looking at saves and shares. And the next thing I look at is actually responses. So sometimes when I do podcast episodes, I'll ask for people like, if this resonated with you, please do this. Or I have a certain call to action of like, let us know over here, or try it and try this framework and let us know the result. And if you get the result, or if you try it, I have a secret framework for you that I'll give you if you DM me. So every once in a while, I'll do episodes like that. That's like, here's how you do X, Y, and Z. Go try it. If you try it, send me a message on Instagram, on DMs, send me this thing, and I will send you a freebie on how to do X, Y, and Z. So then I'll monitor like how many people are actually taking action on it. How many people are actually messaging us? How many people are actually getting results with it, And so when I start to do that and I start to look at like, okay, what are the responses that I'm getting? Am I getting a lot? Am I not getting a lot? Am I getting a few? Am I getting a trickle? Am I getting a flood? And you start to look at all of this stuff and you can start to say, okay, this is really resonating. Now, if you get a lot of people doing that and taking action on something you taught, usually it means it's a great topic. And it also means that the way in which you taught it was simple enough for people to do. They got it. They believed they could do it. They trusted that they could do it. The pain point was big enough for them to even try to do it. So if you start seeing people responding to your content, DMing you about content, following the call to actions, those sorts of things, then it's usually a pretty good indicator that these are going to be really good pieces of content, good topics. And then the next one is usually going to be, this is more geared towards email, but we want to look at open rates and clicks. Okay. So what gives the best open rate? Are you getting open rates on emails that are better than everything else? If so, then the subject line of that email was probably pretty good. Like that probably was a very good subject line, title, or topic. And then you want to look at the click-through rate. Are the click-through rates higher than what most of your other content's doing? If so, then that's probably a pretty good way. You probably communicated it in a pretty good way in the email. So your messaging in the email was pretty good, right? But if you have high open rates and low click-through rates, it means the topic was good, but the communication in the email was not. So the data just tells you what's really working and what's not. So when you know this, you can start to incorporate different ways of teaching, different frameworks, different stories and counterexamples and ways of communicating. And the data will literally tell you what's working and what's not. So again, we have the views, we have the likes, we have watch time, share, save, responses, open rates, and click-through rates. Downloads, those are usually the main indicators that your content's landing or not landing. But even within those indicators, you still want to monitor each one of them to determine what part of the content was working. Was it just the topic and the title? Was it the teaching? Was it both? I don't know. Let's look at the data and have the data start to tell us. So those are the sort of the numbers that you want to look for. Now, what I want you to recognize is that I didn't tell you that the numbers need to be above a certain level. Because when we are looking for our content to see if it's working or not, we're not competing against industry standards at this point, not with this data anyways. What we're competing against is just our past content, because we're looking for what is the best content that I'm pushing out that could be a funnel, could be a launch, could be a topic that does really well, right? A freebie or something along those lines. So we want to start looking at that. And again, remember, there is no line in the sand of this number means good, this number means bad when it comes to this. You're just literally trying to find the best piece of content out there. Now, I will say that sometimes you do want to look for those home runs. And that's kind of what we're looking for. What's going to happen for most people is you're going to be pushing out content, and you'll notice like small little improvements on one piece over another piece and stuff like that. And that's great and dandy and fine in the beginning. But what we're really looking for are kind of these home run topics. Like, what are those topics and teaching styles that really just don't like edge out another piece of content, but like really like, get a significant amount of more of the numbers, more likes, more watch time, more shares, you'll know. So if you're sitting here telling me, Brandon, I don't know if I've had a home run piece. What do you think of this? I'm like, no, you would know, because it's a significant amount of responses and opt-ins and things like that. Now, sometimes you may get a video that goes viral and you're like, oh my God, it's a home run and look at the engagement, blah, blah, blah. You have to be careful with the viral stuff, because you never know why Instagram or TikTok or whoever picked it up and got a bunch of views on it. But sometimes it's not necessarily true that it's going to translate to a webinar, because it's not totally organic, although it is. It's like, you only got that engagement because Facebook or Instagram or TikTok showed it to 10 million people, right? So you want to be careful of those, because those always aren't the best indicators of a really hot topic. So what I always tell people is, if you had a viral video, redo it, maybe change the title and the topic and the teaching style around a little bit and see how it does. Because what I do know is that topics that are really good will always do, for the most part, really good, no matter how you say it or how you teach it or the title that you use, as long as it's relatively the same. Okay. So you want to just like double check those sort of things. But as you start to pay attention to a lot of it, a lot of these numbers and stuff like that, you'll start to get a gauge and an understanding of what's working and what's not. Now, the second thing you want to do is start to look at the numbers around and noticing the numbers. And I did talk about this already, but you do want to know the numbers around identifying if it's just the topic that did really well or if it's the teachings that did really well or both. So I know we talked about this a little bit, but I just want to give you guys some indicators here. When a topic does really well, usually it means more views, high clicks, usually sometimes high likes. But then if the way you taught it or talked about it didn't really work, you're going to have lower watch time and lower saves and lower shares. But the holy grail, what we're really looking for is, okay, what's getting the most amount of likes, what's getting the most amount of views and downloads, but also at the same time has a pretty hefty watch time, also has shares and saves, because no one's going to share and save content that doesn't land and resonate with them. So you want kind of both of these happening at the same time. But then the second thing we're going to do is, if you do find a winner, do the winner again, but use a different title, use a different topic, say it differently, teach it differently, and see if you can find a better way of communicating it. But also what you want to do is measure, is it still performing well? Because if you find a winning topic, a winning theme, a winning whatever, it should do well no matter how you talk about it. It should do well no matter how you talk about it or how you teach it. And again, if you do it again and it doesn't really land, do it again, because sometimes it may not do very well, but the majority of the time it does. And let me give you an example here. One of the topics that did really well for us and continues to do really well for us is when I talk about how-to content is not the best way to build an audience online. No matter how I talk about it, when I talk about it, people just seem to land with it. But I could title a piece of content, how-to content is the worst way to build a business online. And I could then say the same thing, saying, is delivering information the only way to add value? It's really the same topic, but said in two different ways. And usually when you find a winning topic, no matter how you say it, it generally does pretty well. Now, does it do generally pretty well every single time? No. So that's why you want to test it multiple times, 2, 3, 4 times, saying it differently, and do the majority of them sort of rise to the top. If so, it's like you probably have a pretty good winning topic. Okay. This is also why on one of our previous episodes, I talk about trial and error, like get it out there, move quickly, learn data, all that stuff, right? So we can find out this information. The next thing that I do after that is, when we find a winning topic, before I do a full-blown launch or webinar or something along those lines, I actually like to turn these topics into a PDF. So if you're an NGM Plus student, we actually have a whole process on how to create the PDF. But essentially what you want to do is sort of expand on that topic and have some sort of call to action on it, and just see how people respond to it. Is your list opting in for it? Are you running ads to it? Are people opting in? Is the CPL, the cost per lead, really good? Are you getting good numbers? Are people following the call to action? All of that stuff. And if the answer is yes, like people are downloading it, they're very interested in it, then usually it means, okay, let's do a workshop on this, or let's do a challenge on this, or let's do something on it. Now, do you always have to do a freebie? No. Technically, if you just wanted to go straight from like, oh, hey, I found this good piece of content, to a webinar, that's fine too, because the webinar technically is a freebie. But I personally just like to turn them into PDFs and just see how they do. And so we'll do that. You could skip that step if you want, but that would also be a very good indicator of like, okay, is this going to be a good topic for a launch or a funnel? You just try it as a freebie and see what the numbers are around that. Now, what you'll notice after that, if it does pretty well, you do want to turn it into a webinar or a launch or something along those lines. And again, is this a fail-proof way of doing it? No. I've had instances where, content did really well. The freebie did really well, but then it just didn't convert to sales. Like a lot of people would register for the webinar and it just wouldn't convert to sales because the problem was strong enough for them to want to go through the free stuff, but it wasn't strong, like a big enough problem for them to really invest, X amount of dollars into the solution. And so sometimes that will happen. It's not very often, but again, what we're doing here is we're trying to use data. We're trying to use content to stack the everything in your favor as much as we can into your favor. Okay. So those are sort of the numbers that we want to look for. I will give some ballpark numbers. I think with open rates and emails, if you can get above a 2% click-through rate, like you're on your clicks on your emails, you're doing pretty good. If you can get anywhere from like a 30% open rate or higher, you're usually doing pretty good. some of my click-through rates are pretty low. They're like in the ones, and our open rates are usually between 10 and 20%, I think. So they're a little bit low, but it's also because we haven't probably cleaned up our list as much. We probably have some inactive people and things like that. But those are some good sort of numbers to look at. But again, remember, you're just competing against yourself. Okay. There's no line in the sand on any of this stuff. Now, what we do is we then look at our ads. And so we use data to measure our ads as well. Now, ads are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Once you find that winning topic, you're now going to want to create ads around that winning topic. So what we like to do is we like to look at the topic and what problems are occurring because of this topic, what problems are happening or will be fixed by this free webinar or whatever they're going through, and I start to create a lot of copy and messaging around that winning topic inside of our ads. And so I know on the last episode, we talked a lot about ads and the messaging and not knowing really what's going to work and things like that. But we do want to measure some really hard numbers with the ads. And the two biggest ones for me are going to be cost per lead. So what is the cost per lead? What is each lead costing you? So that's a very good indicator of how well it's working within the marketplace. Number two is what is the earnings per lead from that ad and the conversion rate. Okay. And then the next step. So we have CPL, cost per lead, EPL, conversion rate, which kind of goes hand in hand with EPL. And then we have next step. So the cost per lead is just going to be the cost each lead is costing you from that ad. And it's very easy to measure, especially running Facebook ads. They can tell you right off the bat, boom, there you go. EPL is going to take some time because you have to let sales come in. And then you also have to have the capability to track the EPL back to the ad as well. Okay. So to get their cost per lead, Facebook will pretty much tell you that, but all you're going to do really is look at how many people opted in from your ad and divide it by the amount of money you spent. So if you spent $10 and you got 10 people to opt in, your cost is $1, right? EPL is going to be how many leads registered for the funnel, and you're going to divide that by the amount of revenue in sales that you made. And the way you do that is even if you got someone on a payment plan, you're going to add in the total amount if they pay off the entire payment plan. Okay. So if you did, let's just say 10,000 leads and you did $1 million in projected revenue, it means your EPL is going to be $100. And the reason why you want to understand the EPL is because now you know how much you're making from each lead. So now you know what the cost per lead is, and then you also know what the earnings per lead is. So you know how much you can start to spend on ads. Okay. Now, obviously this doesn't take into account other expenses within your company, but it's a purely like dollar in, dollar out sort of way of looking at it. The next thing you want to do is if you can, track the leads that are coming in and see, are these people actually buying? And there have been times and friends that I have that have spent a lot of money, upwards of even $20,000 on a launch on a specific style of ad or type of ad, and going like, wow, the cost per lead's great. And then when they look back after the launch is done, they go like, wow, these leads aren't coming in from $1 a piece with this targeting. They didn't buy at all. We actually lost money on these ads, but these ads over here worked really well. So you do want to monitor the conversion rate. So even if you're getting low cost leads and entering your funnel, but they're not buying, then it's not doing you any good. So that usually means that your messaging is off somewhere, or the leads are just terrible, terrible quality leads. It could, or maybe it's both. So you want to measure the conversion rate, and then you also want to measure the next step. This one isn't as important, but like, let's say you're doing a launch and people are coming from an ad and they're opting in, and the next step is to have them join your Facebook group, and they're not joining the Facebook group. Well, then these leads may not be the best quality, but are they joining the Facebook group? Who are they? Are they the right people? Are they exactly who you're trying to attract? Does the Facebook group have questions that you can ask them? What is the next step? Is the next step to add things to the calendar? How many people are adding things to the calendar? So are the quality of leads could be determined by, are they following the next step or not? And now look, not everyone is going to follow the next step. And depending on what the next step is, the number that you should be looking for is going to be different and all over the board. Okay. So you still want to measure the next step and pay attention to it. But again, remember, it's going to be different depending on what the next step is. But when you do multiple launches or multiple funnels, you can just compare that data each time. So a lot of the time, some of this data is just comparing it to what you're already doing and all the other things. Okay. So those are sort of the numbers you want to look at with ads. So that's ads, that's content. Those are the numbers you want to start looking at. Again, pay attention to all this stuff because all of this could guide you to finding the really great messaging, the really great topics, the really great teaching styles, metaphors, analogies, all of that stuff that you can then use in your launches so you don't have to guess. Now, I'm going to give you real quick, just a quick recap of the really important numbers that you want to pay attention to inside of your business when it comes to sales and funnels. So the very first thing you want to look at is going to be your opt-in page. Your opt-in page should be converting above 20% or above. If you're above 30%, you're doing great. Okay. Obviously cold traffic and warm traffic will have different numbers, but on average, you want to be, even with cold traffic, above 20%. If you're above 30%, you don't have a problem with anything. You're doing great. The next one is going to be the show up rate. So how many people register and then show up live if you're doing a launch? I would say if you have a lot of people registered and I'm talking about like thousands, like you have thousands of people registered and you've been running registration, like getting people to register for weeks, I would say a pretty good show up rate is going to be anywhere from like 10 to 20%. And the main reason for that is a lot of people may be opting in 2-3 weeks before you're even going live, and sometimes they forget about it. So the show up rate's going to go down a little bit. But if you don't have a lot of people, like maybe a few hundred people registered or less, and you had people register pretty close to the time you're going live, I would say you probably want to be in the range of 15 to 20, 25% is probably kind of closer to what you're looking at. If you're above like 20% show up rate, no matter what, that's for live, that's usually you're doing pretty darn good. That's usually pretty good. And then we want to look at conversion rate. So how many people bought? And this doesn't mean live, how many people live bought. It means how many people opted in for this funnel. And again, one of the newbie mistakes that I see people make is they don't have people register or they don't have them segmented. And they just send an email to their list and they go, well, I sent this email to 10,000 people and I only got like 100 to show up live. And it's like, well, how many people registered? And it's like, I didn't have anyone register. And it's like, well, now we don't have the data. So you have to look at and create its own segment, its own list. How many people register? So when someone registers for a launch or a webinar, they get their own segment, their own list, however you want to do it. And however many people register, you're going to divide the amount of units sold to the amount of people registered. So if you had 5 units sold, you're going to take, and you had 100 people register, you can take 5 divided by 100, and it's going to come out as a 5% conversion rate. And if you are doing something where you're not doing a direct sale, you're doing like a book a call. Okay. So, by the way, the conversion rate, usually you want to be at 1.5 to 2.5%, depending on your price point, things like that. Okay. So if you're selling anything and you're usually above a 2.5% conversion rate, you're usually doing pretty good. You're doing pretty well. Then if you're doing a webinar or something like that to get people to book a call, you want people to book a call, then, your conversion rate, probably you want it to be a little bit higher. You want it to be maybe in the range of 2.5 to 5%, if not higher. If you're doing higher than 5%, you're usually doing pretty good. Okay. Then what we aim for inside of our company is we want 60 to 70% of the people who book a call with us to actually show up live for the call. Okay. So we kind of expect 60 to 70% to show up live. Then what we do is out of the live calls, we want to convert 20 to 30%. That's where we're at. Okay. So if you're getting numbers higher than those, you're doing pretty darn good. Okay. So those are the numbers you sort of want to pay attention to. Those are the numbers that will tell you what's working and what's not. And if you learn to read the numbers, it's kind of like the data will tell you exactly where the problem is, what you need to focus on, and more. Here's a quick little example before we wrap up here. If you have a 30% conversion rate on the opt-in page, doing pretty good, right? But then you have a 5% show up rate live. There's a problem. But then the people that showed up live converted at 5%. It's like, well, that worked. So what that tells me is your opt-in page works. The webinar or the training works to get conversions, but there's a disconnect between when someone opts in and showing up live. So then I can go, okay, there's a problem there. So I start to dissect it. Is it the wrong time and date for my audience? Maybe they have 9 to 5s and I did it at 1 o'clock in the middle of the afternoon, So of course they're not going to show up. Is that one of the problems? Is it a logistical thing like that? Number 2 is, was the title, and the topic and the promise strong enough to get people to show up live? I don't know. Maybe the messaging's off. Were the emails good enough that you sent to get people to show up live? Did you send enough emails? You got to start to dissect all of these things. But if you weren't paying attention to the data and you didn't know how to read the data, you would never even know where to look. And so the data around a lot of this stuff is really, really important. And that's what you want to start to look for as you start to put out content, is how to read this, how to monitor it, how to measure it, so that you can start to get the results that you want within your business. You can start to see what's going to work and what's not. You eliminate the guessing that's going to happen within your company. So that's it for this episode. We have number 5 episode, or the 5th episode coming out next week, which is all about objection busting. And then we have the anatomy of a high converting headline after that. And so that will wrap up our series here. We have 2 more episodes to go. So if you are enjoying this series, let me know, send me a message, or leave us a review on iTunes. I always love reading those, and I will see you all next week. Take care, everyone.
Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.